Hey, what's up, mortals? It is I, the Silent Sheepdog, here with a new video for you. Welcome to part 13 of What If Deku Had the System. I just wanted to greet you guys by saying, sit back, relax, you're in for a treat. And so, we begin. Some more time had passed and the final exams finally arrived. The students would all be tested to see how far they've come, and this year the teachers weren't holding back. The students would be paired into groups of 2. Then they would have to face off against one of their teachers. The students were all terrified by this, but there was one who didn't care. It was Izuku. Everyone was confused when they saw his reaction, but that quickly turned into shock after hearing that he wouldn't be taking the exam. This was quickly explained, however, when the teacher said that Izuku had already done enough to get a passing grade, and therefore didn't need to take an exam. It was a little odd to the other students, but they ended up buying it. Now, the only remaining issue was that Bakugo had to do this exam alone. But that was quickly resolved when the teachers explained that one of the students would have to take the exam twice, so that the blonde would have a partner. This seemed to ease the students, but some of them could feel that something was off. Uraraka was one of these people, and her attention was on Izuku. More specifically, how he behaved around and looked at both Todoroki and Ida. She didn't know what was going on, but she could tell that something was going on between the three of them. The latter two were staring at their own shadows with what could only be described as dread, while the former seemed to intentionally radiate a cold aura towards them. She couldn't pretend to know what was going on between them, but there was one thing she knew for certain. Whatever it was, it had torn them apart somehow. The exams went on quite smoothly, with some students passing, while others failed. Bakugo ended up being paired up with Kirishima, much to the redhead's dismay. They struggled badly, but the blonde managed to barely pass the exam. Kirishima did not pass, however, for he got evaluated based on his first participation. After that, the students were told that they would be attending a training camp, regardless of how they did during the final exams. This had everyone excited, as they immediately planned to go shopping at the mall together. Izuku had already arranged so that he wouldn't attend, but the others didn't know that, so they asked him to tag along. The Greenette was going to say no, but he was never given the chance to do so. He had been dragged along to the mall against his own will, and was forced to go where the others went. This didn't seem to last long either, as before he knew it, everyone had gone their own way. Well, that didn't last long. We got left in the dust, Izuku then said, while looking both shocked and almost annoyed.
Yeah, it sure looks that way.
A feminine voice then said, while sounding rather surprised. Izuku jumped a little as he slowly turned to see who it was. It was Uraraka, and she looked as surprised as she sounded. Izuku was caught off guard by this. He had only referred to himself when he said we, and that was because he usually had Igris and a few other soldiers in his shadow. In other words, he hadn't noticed Uraraka until now. The Greenette was about to say something to defend the situation, but he didn't get to when the brunette asked.
What are you getting?
With a calm voice. Izuku was caught off guard once again, but he quickly calmed himself before saying, "Oh, I don't need anything. I just got dragged along for the ride." With a calmer tone, Uraraka chuckled upon hearing this as she then said,
I see. I'm sorry that we forced you out here.
while still chuckling a little. Izuku smiled upon hearing this, waving his hand as he then said, "Don't worry about it. I actually enjoy hanging out with the others," with a joyous tone of his own. The two chuckled a little, until Izuku continued by asking, "Anyway, what did you need to buy?" Uraraka thought for a second, until she said,
I mostly just need to buy bug spray.
with a calm voice. Izuku nodded at this and was about to say something, but he didn't get to when Uraraka suddenly ran off in what seemed to be a panic. Now the Greenette was more confused than ever as he uttered, "Well, that didn't last long. How did I manage to scare even her off?" While sounding just as confused as he felt. "I don't believe that you scared her off, my liege," the voice of Igris then said, coming from his shadow. Izuku was even more confused as he asked, "Then what happened?" While sounding confused. Igris sighed heavily upon hearing this, and Izuku could imagine that he was face-palming in some way, as he then said, No offense, my liege, but you are so dense that you make the earth look hollow, with what sounded like a tired voice. Izuku seemed to get annoyed by this as he almost shouted, What's that supposed to mean? But was quickly cut off when he felt something shove him. Hey, aren't you the kid from the sports festival? Someone then asked. Izuku was caught off guard by this, as he realized that what he had felt was a stranger's arm around his shoulder. He was about to tell him to back off, but he was stopped when he felt something around his neck. It didn't take long for Izuku to realize what it was. It was a hand. The stranger had grabbed onto his throat, holding it with all but one finger. This detail stood out to Izuku, for he couldn't understand why the stranger was holding him in such an odd way. That's when he realized something, as he looked at the man's face before growling. You? The man only grinned upon hearing this, his features confirming his identity. It was the villain that the greenette was all too familiar with. Tamura Shigaraki. Izuku frowned at the villain, not letting himself falter, but Shigaraki just chuckled as he tightened his grip before saying, Don't try anything funny now. If you do, you'll be dead before you know it. With his usual sadistic tone, Izuku still didn't falter. He remained as calm as ever, as he responded by saying, That's funny. I was about to tell you the exact same thing. Shigaraki was now confused, for he didn't understand what Izuku meant. That's when he saw the boy quickly glance at his shadow, prompting the villain to look at it as well. What he saw made him realize why Izuku had remained calm. Within the villain's shadow were a pair of pale blue eyes, ones that he vaguely recognized. This meant one thing. He no longer had the advantage, but the same went for Izuku. So we'll both die. That's too bad. You are quite impressive as a nemesis. With his usual tone, Izuku kept his firm expression as he responded by saying, I wish I could say the same thing about you, but you're so pathetic that the title of nemesis would be wasted on you. With a cold voice, this angered Shigaraki so much that he tightened his grip even further. He was forced to stop, however, when he suddenly felt the cold edge of a blade against his shin. The villain forced himself to calm down, loosening his grip as he did before saying, I propose a truce. I won't kill you if you don't kill me. I didn't come here to fight you. I came to talk. With a much calmer voice. After this was said, the villain could feel how the blade vanished from his leg. He felt a little relieved, taking it as an agreement to the truce. He then saw as Izuku looked at him with more intimidating eyes than before, as he said, Then talk, with a voice that was filled with menace. This video is sponsored by NordVPN. Staying safe online is an ever-growing difficulty, and hackers could exploit you. NordVPN allows you to change your IP address, making you harder to track, securing your privacy. In addition to providing you with safe passage through the web, you can expand the reach of your favorite streaming services. Are you tired of going through 2, 3, or even 4 streaming services to watch your favorite anime? Well, with NordVPN, you can change your country and be able to binge shows like My Hero Academia, Naruto, and your other favorite streaming services with just the press of a button. Check out the link in the description to get 72% off when buying for 2 years. $3.29 a month. This deal is for a limited time. And thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. It didn't take long for the two to get seated. There were many civilians around them, meaning that they had to act naturally if they wanted to stay out of trouble. They were silent for a while, until Shigaraki spoke. You don't make any sense to me, the villain said. Izuku was confused by this, but he didn't get to respond when Shigaraki continued. You're a hero in training, and I saw how you fought at the USJ. You fought with all your might to protect everyone. I know that was genuine. So, tell me, how did you end up becoming Stain's benefactor? Now Izuku was both shocked. He didn't think that Shigaraki would know about his connections with Stain, but he must have found out somehow. He had hoped that no one would find out about this, but it turned out that both friends and foes knew. Still, he didn't let it affect him. He just took a deep breath before he answered by saying, Simple. We see eye to eye. We both agree on the fact that the world needs to change, and we'll stop at nothing to achieve that change. I'll admit that our battle at the USJ was real, but you don't see the bigger picture. My goal has always been to change the world, to make it safe for those who are shunned by society. Now, due to a change in circumstances, being a hero isn't as much of a priority. It's mostly for the alibi now. With his usual cold voice. Shigaraki was shocked by this, for it wasn't what he had expected. He expected the kid to say that he was pretending to be a villain so that he could be a better hero, or that he did it for the sake of power. But that wasn't the case. The boy was fighting for a bigger cause, and it was something he could take advantage of. The villain grinned, almost chuckling at what he planned to do, as he then spoke once more.
Then why don't you just join us? You're already on the path of evil. Sooner or later you'll realize that you're better off embracing it fully. So join me. We can accomplish so much together.
Izuku was only caught a little off guard. Shigaraki was an enemy. He was still holding him by the throat. Yet, he had offered him an invitation to the League. What he said made sense. His so-called alibi won't last forever, so he'd have to become a villain eventually. There was one flaw with it, however. That was that right now, he had nothing to gain by joining. The League probably had great resources, but so did he. He could continue to do what he was doing right now and get away with it, so he had no reason to join the League just yet. The Greenette sighed after realizing this, as he then asked, "What's in it for me?" With the same voice as before, Shigaraki was confused by this, so Izuku continued. "You got your information wrong. I'm not Stain's benefactor. I'm his partner, meaning that we both gain something from cooperating." Shigaraki finally understood now. What the Greenette was saying was that he would consider joining the League if it benefited him somehow. This also meant that he already had what he needed in his current position. So what could he offer him? The villain sat and contemplated this in silence, until he heard the boy whisper, "Play along, I'm at your mercy." Quite hastily, Shigaraki was confused by this until he heard a feminine voice call out,
Hey, Deku! Sorry that I ran off. Who's this?
only to cut itself off. The villain turned to see that it was Izuku's brown-haired classmate, Uraraka, and her face was filled with horror as she realized who it was. "Uraraka?" the Greenette muttered, his voice filled with panic and fear. Shigaraki could immediately sense that Izuku was acting, pretending to be afraid. So now he needed to do his part. The villain quickly let go of the boy, smiling widely as he then said, "Sorry. I didn't know that you were here with someone." With an attempt at a jolly tone, Izuku was still playing his part as Shigaraki stood up and said, "I'll see you around, Midoriya," with a rather sinister tone, before disappearing into the crowd. Izuku was quiet, looking where Shigaraki had once stood. He was so focused that he didn't even notice when Uraraka walked up to him and asked,
Are you alright, Deku?
with a gentle voice. Izuku jumped a little as he instinctively responded with, "Yeah, I'm fine," only to cut himself off when he saw Uraraka's face. It was blank. Not at all what he expected. He thought that she would look scared or concerned, but it was neither. "Is something wrong, Uraraka?" the Greenette asked, seriously wondering what was happening. The brown-haired girl was silent, and her expression didn't change. Izuku still couldn't read it, for there was nothing to read. She was either intentionally making herself unreadable, or she wasn't feeling anything. The silence was then broken as Uraraka, with a serious voice, said,
"I'm not falling for it, Deku."
After these events, the police arrived at the scene. They never managed to catch Shigaraki, which was good news to Izuku. The two teens were then questioned about what had happened, and it took a while. Nightfall came before they knew it, and they left the station together. The teens were mostly silent, neither of them wanting to open up the conversation. Uraraka hadn't said anything else before those shocking words, and it concerned Izuku. Now he didn't know if he needed to threaten Uraraka like he had with Ida and Todoroki. The brunette stopped after making this thought, causing Uraraka to walk a few steps ahead of him. The brunette then stopped and asked,
"What's wrong, Deku?"
without turning to face him. Izuku kept his cold aura as he asked,
"What you said earlier. What do you mean by it?"
with a serious voice. Uraraka still didn't turn around as she answered by saying,
"You know what I mean. I'm not falling for your act."
This only served to make Izuku even more concerned, but he kept his cool and responded with another question.
"What act? I was being held by the throat,"
he said, while pretending to sound irritated. Uraraka still didn't fall for it, as she responded by saying,
"Don't give me that. I'm not stupid. I saw what was in his shadow. You could have easily defeated him on the spot, but you didn't. You let him go on purpose."
with a more irritated voice on her own. Izuku was frozen upon hearing this, unable to respond. Uraraka took this as an invitation to continue, so she said,
"If that wasn't enough, something clearly happened between you and Ida. The two of you barely talk anymore. I can sense tension between you."
While sounding more irritated. Izuku clenched his fists, unsure of how to answer, until he just mustered himself up and said,
"Ida did something that upset me. It still upsets me, actually. As for other things, you only need to know what I'm doing is necessary. I need you to trust me on this,"
with an uncertain voice. Uraraka seemed to have enough of this, as she finally turned to face Izuku. Her face showed a clear hint of anger and irritation, but there was more to it. For a moment, Izuku thought that he could see tears in her eyes. He didn't get to look any closer, however, as Uraraka then said,
"That's the thing, Deku. I don't trust you. I can't trust you. Not after this."
with a pained voice. This broke Izuku. He froze in place, unsure of how to react or respond. He ended up saying nothing, as the brunette then said,
"I can get home on my own. Thanks anyway. I'll see you around, Midoriya,"
with the same pained voice. Uraraka then walked away, leaving Izuku on the street. He was still paralyzed, as he didn't know how to react. He felt pained, cold, and alone. And it was all swelling up within him. Sooner or later it would burst. Not even he knew what would happen then.
"My liege,
Igris then tried to say, but was cut off. His intention was to try and comfort his master, but it wasn't welcome. Instead, he only got a cold and very aggressive,
"Not a word from you! You got that?"
The Shadow Knight was hit with even more concern now, but he couldn't do anything about it. His master was in a lot of pain, and it could easily cloud his judgment if he wasn't careful. He was forced to watch his master suffer, while blood dripped from his tightly clenched fists. Thank you all for sticking around, and I hope you enjoyed. Before you leave, we would just like to let you know that We the Celestials has many other channels for your entertainment and viewing purposes. All the information you need is right here below in the description, so feel free to check out all the other incredible projects that our team creates. Secondly, on behalf of We the Celestials, I would like to thank everyone involved in the production of today's awesome content. Their details will be in the description below. That's all for today's video, so goodbye, and have a divine day.